Hello, Namaskar, Vanakkam. My name is Sudhir Sahasranaman, and you're watching Study with Sudhir. Let's start with the chapter on the United Nations. I must put it on record that I thoroughly enjoyed preparing the presentation for this chapter, and I'm pretty sure you would also enjoy it. Okay, so the United Nations, this is the building. This is an illustration of the building which is there in New York. That's where the headquarters of the United Nations is. Now, what was really the need? We studied that a little towards the end of the Second World War chapter, that the world leaders felt that the League of Nations had been a failure, and therefore there was a need for a more robust organization, World Peace Organization, that would ensure that a third world war did not take place. And that's where this whole idea of the United Nations came into being, because 1920 was when the League of Nations was formed after the end of the First World War, and 1945 is when this entire process for the formation of the United Nations began. So a gap of about 25 years. They met in San Francisco. I will talk about all that. So that's the basic background. What is there in your syllabus? You have the objectives of the United Nations, the composition and the functions of the General Assembly, the Security Council, and the International Court of Justice. This is as per your CISCE website. Okay. However, you obviously need to know what led to the formation of the United Nations, because, you can't get to the main thing without going through the basics, right? So that's what we would do. So why really was the UN established? There are five main reasons for that. One, of course, was the two disastrous world wars, the World War I and World War II, because they left behind a lot of misery, a lot of economic loss, a lot of destruction, a lot of death. Economic depression in many countries, especially in Europe. And it also cost billions of dollars for many countries across the globe. So world leaders obviously realized that if a third world war took place, that could really bring the earth to a close, because that would be unimaginable, because 1945, also remember, the atom bomb was used for the first time in Japan, on Japan rather. So they realized we need an international organization, an effective international organization that would ensure peace in the world. Though now, when you look at it in 2025, that is 80 years later, you realize that the UN also is probably not doing its job to the best of its ability, right? Because there are so many battles and wars being fought across the world today, and the UN is proving to be rather ineffective in doing so, in preventing those wars. Ukraine, Russia, the India-Pakistan skirmish over Operation Sindoor, then you have the Israel, the Middle East crisis. So there are a whole lot of wars which are taking place. So obviously question marks are once again being raised whether we need yet another or a more effective form of United Nations, but that's not really part of what you need to do now. The second one was the fear of the third world war, that, if you do not take necessary steps, you will end up having a third world war, and that could really mean the end of the world. The third very important reason was the failure of the League of Nations to effectively police the different countries in the world, because they felt that you needed a more powerful organization than the League of Nations. Also, League of Nations, the manner in which it was formed, USA not being a part of the League of Nations, Germany coming, exiting. So there were a lot of coming and going kind of thing, and the countries were not really invested in the success of the League of Nations. Then the division of the world into two blocks that happened after the Second World War. We spoke about the Cold War in the previous chapter explanation video. Please go and have a look at it. And they realized that these two blocks with very different ideologies, one was the communist bloc led by USSR, one was the capitalist bloc led by USA. And with these two very different ideologies, it would kind of lead to clash of thoughts, clash of ideologies over a period of time. Therefore, UN was even more required right now. The fifth important point was the destructive weapons, because atom bombs, as I said, were used for the first time. Different countries were also arming themselves, and they felt that if every country was overarmed, that could lead to a problem, especially if the ruler of that country was a bit of a hothead and ended up using those weapons. So these were the 5 reasons why the UN was established in the first place. Okay. In the illustrations, you can see the disastrous world wars and the fear of the Third World War, which would obviously be an nuclear bomb usage war. Though now I think the Third World War now is going to be very, very different. It's going to be an algorithm war. It's going to be a war over data. It's going to be a war that is going to be led by artificial intelligence. I mean, God forbid if a Third World War really happens, but that's what most of the geopolitical experts talk about. Now, let's talk about the origin of the United Nations. Now, the process began even before the Second World War came to an end. American President Franklin D. Roosevelt, one of the most well-known presidents of the USA, and British Prime Minister Winston Churchill, who was Prime Minister till 1945, they held discussions that led to the formation of the United Nations. The text for the UN Charter that would really talk about what exactly the UN will do, what its powers would be, what its objectives would be, what its functions would be, that was all drafted at the San Francisco Conference in June 1945. Okay. It was signed by 50 countries that participated in that conference in San Francisco. The UN effectively and formally came into effect on the 24th of October, and that is marked as United Nations Day. The charter was ratified, means 29 countries said that, okay, this is the charter, the objectives, the functions, the powers of the United Nations that we accept, and that would be the rule going forward by 29 countries, and that included the 5 permanent members of the Security Council, the 5 permanent members who have the veto power: USA, USSR, China, UK, and France. Now, how were these countries chosen? Now, this is something you just need to know, because these were all on the winning side of the Second World War. So the Second World War victors, they kind of conferred on themselves the veto power, and they became the permanent members of the Security Council. Now in 2025, in the 21st century, many other developing countries like India, Brazil, South Africa, we all want to be on the Security Council. But then the question arises, when the United Nations itself is such a weak organization now, not really having the powers to ensure world peace, does a seat, a permanent member seat on the Security Council really have much importance? That's another point that you need to remember. 24th October, as I said, is celebrated as UN Day. Please remember this from the MCQ point of view. Now, let's then come to the objectives of the United Nations, which is specifically there as part of your syllabus. What really is the United Nations tasked with doing? Also, please remember in your textbook, whatever different photographs are there. For example, there is a photograph of Stalin, Joseph Stalin, the ruler of USSR at that time, Roosevelt and Churchill, right? So you could get photograph-based questions or an illustration or a caricature of these 3 leaders. So you should be able to recognize. So please definitely have a look at those black and white photographs largely, which are there in whichever textbook your school has prescribed for you. Now, what were really the objectives of the United Nations? The first and the foremost one, of course, it's mentioned in the preamble to the UN Charter. It was to maintain international peace and security. Most important, international peace and security. How could you remember this? IPS. IPS to malum hai na? So international peace and security, you can remember it like that. And what the UN will do is will take collective measures for prevention and removal of threats to peace and suppress any acts of aggression. Now, kind of in a 3-mark or a 4-mark question, you need to flesh it out. You write it in points. You don't write it in full paragraphs. Write 1, 2, 3, 4, but ensure that you flesh it out and not just mention this. If you mention only this, you will not get full marks. You need to write this part also so that you will get full marks. The second one was to develop friendly relations among nations so that they don't engage in any kind of conflict. And that would be like, I am a country, I respect my neighbor, I respect your country, and I expect the same from you. The self-determination of people means that the people of any country have the right to determine what is best for them and in their interest. To achieve international cooperation, in solving international issues relating to economy, social, cultural, environmental issues like climate change, etc. Encourage respect for human rights, freedom of people. So these are the absolutely right things that the UN is supposed to take care of. So that is another important objective. These objectives you definitely need to remember. Develop codes just like IPS. Similarly, you can develop codes for each one of them and ensure that you remember it. Okay. FR is another one, like FR, you say no for real. That is another way of remembering the second point, friendly relations, right? Then this is international cooperation, and then also the UN is expected to be a center for harmonizing actions of nations to attain these objectives. Harmonizing means everybody is in harmony in order to ensure that all these objectives are achieved. It doesn't serve the purpose if half the member nations are not in agreement with this objective. So every member nation who signs up to be a member of the United Nations agrees to these objectives of the UN. So the new objectives were disarm, decolonize, and develop. Decolonize means no country will go and create a colony, just like Britain had made India a colony. That will not happen. Disarm means you will not kind of hoard different kind of weapons. Again, something which is not really happening. Develop means develop the country for the interest of the people, develop the neighborhood, develop the region, everything. And 3D is a good code to remember this. Disarm, decolonize, and develop. Now, then you just need to know a few aspects. For example, all the organs of the United Nations are based in New York, except for the International Court of Justice that is based at The Hague in the Netherlands. Okay, we will study about that. The UN flag was adopted on the 20th of October 1947. So the UN Day is 24th of October 1945 or 24th of October every year. It was established in 1945, but the UN flag was adopted on the 20th of October 1947. That is almost 2 years later. Which are the official languages? Now, this is another code that you can remember. Fars you can remember with an S. You have French, Arabic, Russian, Chinese, English, and Spanish. Okay. But the documents are written mainly in French and English. The membership is open to all the peace-loving countries. Obviously, you have to say that you love peace. Otherwise, if you say, I love war, then you are not going to get membership of the UN, right? Right now, 193 countries are UN members. And the last one to get admitted was South Sudan. Okay, this also can come as a MCQ. India was one of the first 50 members that actually took part in the San Francisco conference, even though it was not independent at that time. Jawaharlal Nehru represented India at the San Francisco conference. Now let's come to the different organs. Now there are 6 organs, of which 3 are really in your syllabus. The 6 organs, just for your understanding: General Assembly, Security Council, the International Court of Justice, then the Secretariat of the United Nations, something called the Trusteeship Council, which is not part of a syllabus, and the Economic and Social Council. Okay, these last 3 are not in your syllabus. We need to focus on the first 3. So this is a photograph of the United Nations. Every year between September, October mainly, world leaders go and address the United Nations. This year, Prime Minister Narendra Modi is not going. Foreign Minister will be addressing the UN instead. So they stand here. Okay. The person who addressing stands here and addresses the entire UN. Now, the United Nations General Assembly is the deliberative, means they discuss. Deliberate means to discuss. Representative, because all the countries are represented in the General Assembly, all the 193 member nations. And it is also the policy making organ of the United Nations. You need to remember this. Deliberative, representative, and the policy making organ of the United Nations. This is very important. All the members of the United Nations are members of the General Assembly. Each state has 5 representatives, but only 1 vote. So India can have 5 representatives at the UN, but they will have every country will have only 1 vote. The regular session of the General Assembly takes place from September to December. The Assembly elects a new president, 21 vice presidents, 6 chairpersons of 6 committees. Okay, chairpersons of 6 committees. So this is the election process. The presidency rotates between the 5 main groups, the 5 main continents of Africa, Asia, Eastern Europe, Latin America, that is South America, and Caribbean, Western Europe, and other states, right? And the decision, so it goes the presidency rotates in alphabetical order, essentially, of the Security Council. But this we are talking about the General Assembly, and all decisions of the General Assembly are taken by 2/3 majority. Okay. Now, what are the functions of the General Assembly? Their main function is to, and there are many functions, but I'm highlighting the four main ones. So if you get a question of 3 marks, you include these four, but in your book, you can read more which are there, which are not so important, but these are the more important ones. To appoint the Secretary General on the recommendation of the Security Council. Security Council will recommend that this person can be appointed as a Secretary General, and then the General Assembly will appoint. It will also make recommendations for peaceful resolution of disputes. That any Ukraine-Russia war, that Russia should kind of desist from attacking Ukraine, or the Israel-Iran conflict. So there should not be any conflict. So it will pass those kind of resolutions. It will also make recommendations to promote international political, social, and economic cooperation between different countries or within a region, right? So you see these kind of deliberations taking place at the UN, as is obvious in this illustration. To consider and approve the budget of the UN, because everything is, every country does make donations, and assign contribution among members, that each country needs to contribute this amount to the working of the United Nations. It's like, you have a building, apartment complex, there will be a committee set up. So every house has to contribute a certain amount of maintenance amount every month, or a annual fee, right? So that you build a corpus, so that the association and the general apartment complex could function. United Nations is something similar. So they would have other functions, like, they will receive reports from the Security Council. They will discuss any question about any kind of international dispute. They will focus on cooperation. But these are the four main functions that you need to focus on. You also read the rest of them in your book. But as I said, if a 3-mark question comes or a 4-mark question comes, ensure that these four should definitely be there as part of your answer. Then next, let's move to the UN Security Council. This is the executive body of the United Nations. The first one was the deliberative body. This one is the executive body, and its primary responsibility is of maintenance of international peace and security. So it's like, if General Assembly is like Parliament, which kind of makes the thing, the real power is in the government, like in what you have studied in civics, right? So Security Council is the executive organ. It consists of 15 members. Now, this is important. 15 members. So you see, it's a smaller body. The General Assembly I showed you, it's a larger hall. This is a smaller body consisting of 15 members, each person from every country. 5 of them are permanent members. I mentioned USA, USSR, China, England, UK, and France, right? There are 10 non-permanent members. They include 5 Afro-Asian countries, that is Africa and Asia, 2 Latin American countries, 2 West European countries, and 1 East European country. So 3 from Europe, 2 from West Europe, 1 from East Europe, 5 from Africa and Asia combined, and 2 from Latin American countries. Now, this is something which you need to know. How are the non-permanent members? How would you decide which are these 10 non-permanent members? They are elected by the General Assembly by 2/3 majority for a period of 2 years. So if you are elected, you would be a non-permanent member of the Security Council for a period of 2 years. Okay. If a member country retires, it is not eligible for immediate re-election. It will have to wait for another 2 years before it can once again try to become a non-permanent member of the Security Council, again for a period of 2 years. Clear? The presidency of the Security Council rotates according to the English alphabetical listing of the member states. Like India was a president recently, but that's mainly because it will come A, B, C, D, E, F, G, H, I. It will come to India. You will become a president of the Security Council in an alphabetical order. The 5 permanent members have the veto power. Now, what exactly is a veto power? Now, this is one of the favorite questions as far as the board exams is concerned. It is the negative vote of a permanent member. That is, I do not want this particular issue to be discussed, or I reject whatever the Security Council or the other 4 members of the Security Council are saying, which is why whenever India wanted to do something against Pakistan at the Security Council, get a resolution moved, country like China would come to the aid of Pakistan and ensure with its veto power that no such resolution was passed, right? So that's always a problem with the veto power. And the veto power, according to me, because these people, these 5 countries were the victorious countries in after the World War. So they kind of conferred on themselves. So getting it removed is very difficult now, but it really makes it a very unequal kind of an organization. All the 193 member states are not equal, and that's another twisted googly question that you could be asked. How do you say that all the 193 member states are not equal? Because these 5 members have been given this veto power, and that gives them a slightly superior power over the other 188 countries. So the veto power is a negative vote of a permanent member. The Security Council is powerless to act if any of the 5 permanent members use the veto power. Now, what are the functions of the Security Council? The first function is to maintain international peace and security in accordance with the principles of the United Nations. So here you can see there are these 15 members. I haven't counted. It could be plus minus 15, including the 5 permanent members. And then there are their support staff, etc., the secretariat staff. So to maintain international peace and security, these again 5 ones you need to remember. To recommend to the General Assembly, this one is important, the appointment of the Secretary General, and together along with the General Assembly, they elect the judges of the International Court of Justice as well. They formulate plans for the establishment of system to regulate armaments, not like, any country cannot keep on holding arms. Again, the UN has been largely unsuccessful, though in the 90s and the early part of the 21st century, they were kind of going after certain countries like Iraq, etc., to ensure that they did not have different kind of dangerous weapons. To recommend the admission of new members if any new country comes, whether it can be admitted to the United Nations. To take military action against an aggressor, even that the United Nations can do. So these are the 5 important functions of the Security Council that you must most definitely remember. What is the composition of the security? Now, next, let's come to the International Court of Justice. Now, this is established at the Hague in Netherlands. It is called The Hague. You cannot just write Hague. You need to write it as The Hague, which is in Netherlands. It was established in 1946. Now, 15 judges are elected to 9-year terms by the UN General Assembly and Security Council, sitting independently, but both of them will be involved in the election of these 15 judges. But they don't consult each other. The General Assembly will not consult the Security Council. Security Council will not consult the General Assembly, but together they will play a role in the election of these 15 judges. There can be only 1 judge from every country. You cannot have more than 1 judge from any country. Elections are held every 3 years for 1/3 of the seats. It's not like 9 years. Elections are held only after 9 years. No, every 3 years, 1/3 of the judges will retire, and another set of 1/3 judges will be elected, right? Members of the court do not represent their governments, but are independent judges. Like, if there is an Indian judge, it does not mean that he will kind of support India. He will be a judge, and most of the cases, they may not even sit on any case which involves their own home country. It also elects the president and the vice president of the International Court of Justice for a 3-year term. So this is the composition of the International Court of Justice. Then what are the functions of the ICJ? They decide cases in accordance with international treaties and conventions, principles, laws. So there are international laws. So for example, it could be water disputes. It could be territorial disputes. It could be like that Kulbhushan Jadhav, the person who Pakistan claimed was an Indian spy, and India said he was just another citizen who was arrested by Pakistan. That went to the International Court of Justice, where both India and Pakistan will present their case before the International Court of Justice. They will also advise any other organ of the United Nations. For example, General Assembly or Security Council wants a legal opinion. They will send it to the ICJ, and ICJ, with its 15 judges, they will advise the whichever body of the United Nations has asked for their advice. They will settle disputes about interpretation of international law, that how the international law has to be interpreted so that it is fair to both the countries who are in dispute. To settle disputes about reparation, what is reparation? The act of making amends for a wrong by providing payment or other assistance to those who have been wronged. For example, one country attacks another country. It does a lot of damage, right? The other country asks for damages in the sense that you pay compensation for the amount of damage that you have done in my country. So it will go to the ICJ, and the ICJ will say that, okay, this kind of amount is good enough for this kind of damage which has been done by this country. So this country has to pay, let's say, $200 million to this country. I'm just giving a very general figure, right? So that kind of a thing. So that is also decided by the ICJ. Then the fifth important function is to codify international law. What does it mean? Codification is the process by which the rules of law are put in written form. That is, whatever law is there, you write it down in written form. So the entire process of codification of all kinds of international laws is also undertaken by the International Court of Justice. Okay, with this we come to the end of this particular chapter. I hope this is one chapter, unlike the first three chapters, the First World War, rise of dictatorship, Second World War, where there is a lot of storytelling. This one is a little bit about knowing different points. So a certain element of, I wouldn't say rote learning. You try to create codes by which to remember it, but you need to remember things because those are some of the very boring questions that are asked in the world history paper. Okay, that's the unfortunate part. But I am thinking that with more competency focused questions, I will be preparing a test paper, at least for MCQs. You will get an idea about how different kind of points can be interpreted to ask you some real googly questions. Okay, so look forward to my success test papers, at least for MCQs. I will definitely try to do. Okay, thank you very much. Subscribe to the channel, share the video, and I hope all of you have understood and you will do very well as far as this exam is concerned. Tata, bye bye, namaskar.